First of all, thank you, Mahmood Bhai, for joining us. There's been a lot that's been happening, so let's like just cut down to business. Let's first talk about the ceasefire. What is happening after it? How do you look at it?
Well, it's very confusing for many, especially because this agreement has been signed by parties that don't necessarily include all of the Palestinian factions in terms of the agreement that happened between them, because there were multiple agreements. Clearly, there was an agreement between Trump and the Arab and Muslim states, then Trump with the Israeli side. Then you had the draft itself of the ceasefire agreement or deal. And in that ceasefire agreement, there were two agreements, one of them for the Israelis and one of them for the Palestinian side. We spoke before about the clauses that have been amended and changed with the Arab and Muslim leaders that Netanyahu later amended, of course, through his representatives. Then there was another clause that was removed afterwards in relation to the agreement. Several of the Arab and Muslim states said that this wasn't the agreement that we signed with President Trump. However, he still went ahead with it and declared it. Therefore, we have a complex situation that isn't necessarily clear. However, one of the reasons that it is this way is because both parties couldn't agree on a final formula to sign a deal and get this started. And with regards to the mediators, many of them believed that they just need to find something to start a ceasefire with that can potentially be built upon, especially with how stubborn the Israeli side is. That was visible from the beginning and was visible later on. So, what did we come up with? We came up with a formula that would stop the full blown genocide, however, leave elements of maneuverability to the Israeli side because we have seen repetitive breaches. So, we understood that the ceasefire should take effect immediately. There were certain demands or mentions by the American President Donald Trump that weren't very realistic. This was later clarified by the Palestinian side when they said, for example, we cannot release 70 or all of the prisoners of war, the bodies and the living ones, in 72 hours, which was the time frame that Donald Trump was speaking about. And the reasoning was, well, number one, Israel wouldn't be withdrawing from all of the areas in the initial phase. There was an initial withdrawal line. And then we later understood that Israel had further withdrawal that wasn't necessarily declared, again, raising more questions. And many of these bodies could have been in areas that Israel still functions in, which would make it impossible for the Palestinian side to release, because Israel, well, they're practicing what they're called defensive mechanisms now. They're using that as an excuse to breach the ceasefire. In addition to that, you have the immense levels of destruction and rubble, and many of these prisoners of war that Israel had killed, by the way. It's impossible to take them out without very heavy machinery and heavy equipment that Israel is still preventing from going into the Gaza Strip. They're allowing tractors and excavators, but not larger machinery that is definitely needed to start dealing with the huge crisis that Gaza is facing and will be facing for some time after this too. Now, Israel is, from its end, claiming that the Palestinian side is breaching by not releasing all of the bodies, although that was clear from the beginning. And Israel is breaching the ceasefire again by also not allowing the required aid to go into the Gaza Strip. However, today we heard that that has been dealt with. So in the first few days, they were allowing 300 trucks to go in. Now they are allowing 600 trucks to go in. Of course, 300 is already a massive improvement from the 20 to 30 that used to go in under the sadistic operation of what was called the GHF, which is no longer operational at the moment. But still, Gaza is in a crisis and they need large numbers of trucks to go in and rehabilitate the population, feed them, give them the necessary medication, deal with everything to do with the traumas and disasters of the genocide. So we could be facing, and that's a possibility here, a situation similar to what Israel is doing in Lebanon. A declaration of a ceasefire, separate side agreement with the United States in relation to understandings that would enable Israel to carry out killings in Gaza based on any pretext or any excuse. However, the high volume, intense genocide attacks would basically be reduced. They wouldn't be at the same scale. So we're facing an ongoing problem, which is understandable because this situation wasn't really going to be solved in one day. We have a country that is insisting on not allowing a Palestinian state altogether, regardless of who runs the state. The Israelis are finding more excuses to escalate. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Netanyahu's defense minister said that the next phase is going to focus on the demilitarization and also taking down the tunnels of the Palestinian resistance, and we have a long task ahead of us. So we're facing uncertainty here. The good news is, well, number one, the people aren't really facing the same levels of barbarity that they faced before in terms of deliberate attacks on civilians at a very large scale, but still a minimal scale, which is very problematic. Every drop of blood is precious and they shouldn't be getting away with anything. And hundreds of trucks of aid are going in to feed a starving population, and more medication that is required, more fuel, of course, more generators to make the hospitals functional again. Let's not forget that Israel was deliberately targeting every lifeline in the Gaza Strip, whether when it comes to the healthcare element, the infrastructure, the civil society, anything to do with that, with food, aid, water, all of that. So that's in relation to the good stuff. And I mean, some people in Gaza are reporting that, they're waking up finally 3 to 4 days without bombing, which is how all of us should live, really, under no threat or risk of being bombed all of a sudden. But still, with all of that, it's still destroyed, and there should be an accelerated effort to continue. Some of the mediators are saying that, well, the maneuverability isn't that big in relation to Benjamin Netanyahu. We heard that from the Turkish side. Also, the Turkish president also said that Israel knows that if it goes back to the genocide, it's going to pay a heavy price. However, we haven't had any elaborations in relation to that, and it's unclear whether Israel will really stop its hostilities following this genocide. What is evident, however, is that there are splits, both internally in Israel and also in relation to the American administration and between the both countries to an extent. We know very well that Israel and the United States have a strategic relationship. As a matter of fact, you could consider Israel an extension. However, just like Donald Trump doesn't necessarily agree with all of the governors of the American states, he wouldn't necessarily agree with everything to do with Benjamin Netanyahu, despite the leverage that Benjamin Netanyahu has against Donald Trump. And from what we have seen, Benjamin Netanyahu didn't actually want to go into this agreement, but he was forced to get into this agreement. And the vulnerability of the agreement itself is an evidence to the fact that, well, they had to amend certain things to suit Benjamin Netanyahu to make it work, rather than everything collapsing. On the negative side, you have a situation where, well, number one, there's uncertainty, there is no accountability, there are no guarantees, and there isn't a clear published plan that gives the concerned people globally reassurance to what's going to happen in the future. And these are things that we need. Whether the next few days or weeks will tell that is going to be left to the unfolding events and unfolding information that we're going to receive. But so far, it's looking like it's very, very dangerous, and there are likelihoods that it's not going to last.
You mentioned that there were some sort of breaches. What breaches are we talking about? Has Gaza been attacked after all these talks?
Yes, it was attacked, number one, before the ceasefire took effect. Israel's excuse that it's still not the time because it started at 12 noon. So some people who were trying to go back to the north were shot and killed, although Israel knew very well they were civilians. Then, when it actually came into force, Israel still continued to kill and target certain locations. For example, Shuja'iyya, Gaza City, and Rafah. Israel carried out operations in these areas that killed innocent civilians. Israel also breached the agreement with the level of aid going in. Again, I have heard certain reports that it was addressed today, but that was yet another breach. From the Palestinian side, they of course breached nothing, because with regards to the bodies, they released, of course, all of the living prisoners of war. That's done. But with the bodies, they were clear from the beginning. And there was even a clarification from the American side about that. When Israel tried to claim that they're breaching, it was resolved pretty quickly. That indicates that the mediators and the American side also knew that Netanyahu was trying to play another game. So these were the breaches. And again, how long will they be able to get away with these killings that they're doing sporadically is also remains unclear to this moment.
So let's talk about the prisoner exchange. How did it go out? And do we have stories of prisoners? How were they when they were in prison in Israel?
Yeah, of course. Well, the Israeli prisoners of war, who were all of them were IDF, by the way, because the IDF soldiers were the last ones remaining. So these were part of the Gaza division that the Palestinian resistance took down on Al-Aqsa flood on October the 7th. So they were released. They looked in good shape. As a matter of fact, the Palestinian resistance fighters allowed them to have video calls with their parents before their release too. They were released swiftly and smoothly. The Palestinian abductees, on the other hand, it was a cycle of torture. Number one, 77 of them were killed deliberately, executed in Israeli prisons from torture or starvation or both. And the ones who were released, many of them suffer from many mental health issues, many with bodily harm. Many of them were psychologically tortured. For example, I shared a video on my channel the other day about one of the prisoners being released, and he's in like a frantic mode, almost as if he lost his mind because the Israelis told him, "We killed all of your family." And then when he went back, he saw his family alive, and he almost passed out after he saw them. The Palestinian prisoners who were released, they said that it doesn't matter how hard or how much they try and explain, it will never give the people the true image of the hell that they were living in the Israeli dungeons. And one of these hells, for example, being blindfolded and handcuffed with your hands behind your back for 100 days, not seeing the light, not being able to move without your handcuffs removed, having dogs attacking you in prison, playing loud music preventing you from sleeping, giving you very minimal amounts of food, torturing you, beating you, and not giving you treatment, humiliating you, harassing you, raping you in many cases too. The bodies of the Palestinians who were released, many of these bodies were handcuffed civilians that Israel handcuffed and executed in cold blood and sent back to the Palestinian side in trucks. Some of them were ran over by Israeli tanks. This is the situation that the Palestinian prisoners are going back in, and the bodies of the Palestinian prisoners as well. Abductees, to be more accurate, or the real hostages. And those who were released, 1,968 in total. We're talking about over 250 with life sentences, long serving sentences, and just over 1,700 from the Gaza Strip who were abducted by Israel after the 7th of October. Again, civilians, we're talking about civilians kidnapped from their homes, abused and tortured. And we heard many, many stories about these people. If you would talk for 300 podcasts, you wouldn't be able to give the true image of about everything that happened. That means that the Palestinian resistance in total freed between 4 to 5,000 approximately Palestinian prisoners of war since they started to have the recent prisoner exchanges with Israel. However, 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, abductees, remain in Israeli dungeons, many of them without trial, under administrative detention. Children and women remain in Israeli prisons too, and that's going to be an ongoing case because several figures from the Palestinian resistance said that these people are going to be the next thing that we work on. We're never going to leave them like that in Israeli prisons because Israel refused to release some of the names, and they also were arguing and being difficult about the numbers. This could have been a clean slate. And as a matter of fact, we need to remember the Battle of Al-Aqsa flood started primarily to release the Palestinian abductees in Israeli prisons, following 9 years of pointless negotiations because the Israeli side wasn't interested in having a deal. There were 4 Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza since 2014. And Israel constantly refused to have a deal with the Palestinian side through negotiations. And they were neglecting this matter. So that's why it happened primarily. So Israel, by leaving some of the names, being difficult, very difficult about other names, some of them doctors, like Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. There are confirmations from his family that he's on the list to be freed, but we don't know exactly when. Israel wasn't going to release him. This is a doctor, a manager of a hospital, whose only fault was, according to them, was to remain in an area that Israel besieged, insisting on serving patients with hardly anything. His son was brutally killed by Israel as leverage against him, yet he continued his work. If you recall at the time, in what Israel called at the time the General's Plan, which was an ethnic cleansing campaign dedicated to completely ethnically cleanse the northern part of Gaza when they weren't allowing anything to go in. So this is what we're dealing with here. And the fact that, well, number one, there's no accountability. No one's saying Benjamin Netanyahu has to pay a price, or any in Israel have to pay a price. No one is saying that they need to disarm. They're saying that to the Palestinian side. And no one is guaranteeing no Israeli aggression moving forward. And anyone who is saying that needs to come up with either the evidence or the mechanisms or the action plan that he or she or they may have to actually stop them. Otherwise, we're going to continue down the same cycle, because you still have a genocidal entity that was formed on terrorism and killed people from the United States, from Britain, from Turkey, from uh, Arab countries, several Arab countries. In total, they killed more than nationals from more than 10 countries in the past 2 years. They're still being enabled and still getting away with murder. And that's an ongoing problem, whether this ceasefire agreement succeeds or not. And the thing that I find baffling is some of these elements included in these talks are not giving us or expecting us to take it as that's it, the peace that Donald Trump approved. Donald Trump was sinking in this genocide. He is fully participant and complicit. And now, are we going to buy that? Or is it rope for Israel to save Israel from the humongous damage that it suffered in the past 2 years? There are more questions than answers. And that has been the case for a very long time. And so long as there are no concrete measures, the problem is going to continue.
You talked about women and children being abducted by Israel. During this exchange, were there any women and children released?
Yes, some of them were released. Well, a lot of them were released in some of the previous rounds of prisoner exchange because we've had two so far. One of them was in the initial ceasefire, then in the second ceasefire. And now, of course, we have this. So, when the Palestinian resistance was aiming to empty the Israeli prisons, at the time there were 6,000 Palestinian abductees and hostages in Israeli prisons. But the problem is, in the past 2 years, Israel imprisoned 8,000 people, including in inhumanitarian conditions, because Israel doesn't have the capacity for that many prisoners. And the man in charge of the prisons is none other than Itamar Ben-Gvir, who promised to starve them. And we can actually see how starved they are by how they're being released, the level of torture, the level of abuse. So many of these children were actually released in the past 1.5 years, and many of the women too, but some of them still remain. And that's going to be an ongoing problem. So we have here the global corporate and mainstream media telling you that the Israelis, were released and released the bodies, and no one is talking about the remaining abused and tortured and executed in many cases Palestinian abductees and hostages in Israeli dungeons. And that's something everyone should be talking about. Because the way they're portraying it, it's as if the Israeli life is worth more. Of course, we're used to seeing that for a very long time. However, now that must change, and that change must come from the ground roots, from the people in the beginning, because what we're witnessing now is a global ground roots movement at the end of the day. Therefore, it's essential to highlight these positions and also call for an implementation. And thankfully, listen, I mean, it's really encouraging to see so many people sharply aware of what's happening and not really buying into what's labeled as peace with this ongoing aggression. They're telling you, no, the occupation has to end. Zionism needs to be dismantled. Netanyahu needs to pay the price. We're leaving people here without accountability after they conducted the most barbaric genocide the world has seen in the 20th century, and one of the worst crimes that we saw in history, in humanity's history as a whole. And again, that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Um, Tell us your opinion about the Egypt summit. What do you think about it as a whole?
Well, to be honest with you, there is no denying that many countries had diplomatic efforts to try and reach a ceasefire. There is no denying that. With genuine intention to reach a ceasefire. Many of them were clear that they're not going to be doing anything militarily. As a matter of fact, many of them did not use their full diplomatic and financial leverage to stop the genocide. But in relation to efforts and diplomatic efforts, there definitely were undeniable efforts from these countries. And that led us to this moment. And again, as I said with the positives and negatives about the ceasefire itself, this would apply on the agreement in Egypt. We have a reduction of intense attacks, absolutely. We have Israeli withdrawal from certain parts. We have aid going in. However, what we do not have is, well, number one, a clear outline. So, can someone show us what they exactly signed on? What is the agreement? Where are things going to? What's gonna enforce this guarantee or these guarantees that the war is not gonna resume and the genocide wouldn't reach higher scales than before? How are they gonna pay the price for it? Or is it a case of, well, they don't want to publish it to try and make it successful, because then there would be more scrutiny, for example, which still isn't satisfactory from an observer's vision and also from the perspective of the people who were going through and still are a genocide in Gaza. So there are elements that are positive and there are elements that are negative. But what we shouldn't fall into is actually call it a peace plan. Because this is really far from the truth. Number one, the man leading it was the leader of the main country arming Israel, who Israel wouldn't have been able to carry a genocide without, in the form of Donald Trump. Then they are trying to, well, by what Donald Trump was saying, impose this neo-colonial mandate on the Palestinian people. As a matter of fact, Tony Blair not only visited some elements in the Palestinian Authority, led by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but he was also in Egypt. Is he going to play a part or is he not going to play the part? And what is the say of the people in Gaza? This is what we need to highlight here and put very many bold lines under. What do the people of Gaza want? Do they want a new mandate? Do they want to give up historical and contemporary rights? Do they want an agreement that would enable the country that committed the genocide against them to carry out targeted operations or whatever operations under any pretext in the future? They don't. And that should be the main thing. The main concern should be about what the people in Gaza want and need, rather than what external forces want to impose on the Palestinian people. And again, certain elements of what is needed for the Palestinian people have been embedded in this agreement, like preserving the Palestinian people in their land, because let's not forget, Israel planned to ethnically cleanse them. Many regional and global countries were working on expelling the population, and they tried to apply a lot of pressure on Egypt to take the population. Israel clearly showed intention to resettle in Gaza. As a matter of fact, they were talking about the Greater Israel Project in many cases. These things don't go and fade away all at once. And there is that risk of this being a cover-up for another plan that Israel might do. And if we're concerned about, of course, preserving whatever happened so far and extend it further, we need to keep up the pressure on the decision makers, not only to make sure that they implement everything to a T in regards to the agreement itself, but also provide us with more clarification so that the people can be assured that this genocide isn't going to continue and that Israel will indeed stop its barbaric actions inside of the Gaza Strip.